I'd like to try to use that time to answer some of your questions. So please start typing questions in the comments, and we will try to answer them. I'm checking with my team now. And we're going to try to collect some questions. Just to bring you up to speed, if you missed the briefing yesterday, it really was kind of peak 2020, in the middle of a discussion about the total number of Americans who would be killed by the coronavirus and whether it would be more or less than 100,000. The topic turned to Tiger King. A reporter from the New York Post had heard news that President Trump might be considering a pardon for Joe Exotic. This comes after his son, Don Jr., reportedly became a fan of Tiger King. And Don Jr. responded to Tiger King in the most Don Jr. way possible. Everybody's had a different reaction to Tiger King, but his reaction was, "I didn't realize you could buy tigers so cheaply. I'm interested in getting one." That is, that's what Don Jr. took away from Tiger King. That the characters in Tiger King are actually a model for how he would like to live in some respects. That's really not what most people got from Tiger King. So that was part of the briefing yesterday. Also in the briefing yesterday, President Trump left the briefing early and left it to Vice President Pence to take over. And Pence made a point of emphasizing that a new area of focus... Oh, I'm just getting an alert. I'm getting an alert. What is this news that I am getting? All right, the news I'm getting is unclear. All right, so Vice President Pence said that a new area that they're putting a lot of focus on is Philadelphia. Excuse me. That is not a coronavirus cough. That is, I ate some nuts before I stepped out here, and I'm choking on a nut that I ate. By the way, I am broadcasting from my own home. We do not have the resources of our studio, so if there are any technical difficulties, I apologize in advance. Again, we are all working from home. Like most people in America, we are staying at home. So yesterday, Vice President Pence said that Philadelphia has become an area of particular concern and warned residents of Philly to practice social distancing. Pennsylvania now has about 17,000 confirmed cases, and Philadelphia accounts for nearly 5,000 of those. Now, right after we got this news that there is a potential new national hotspot in Philadelphia, we've also learned that at least 2 testing sites in Philadelphia are going to be closed when tomorrow the federal government stops supporting testing. A wide number of sites that have been sponsored by FEMA are now losing their federal funding and will either close or become operated by states. So that is something else to bear in mind. You're going to hear the phrase from Vice President Pence today. He's going to say, I predict, he says every day, that we are leaving no stone unturned and we are using all the instruments of our national power to fight this epidemic. When he says that, please remember that federal funding is actually ending tomorrow for a lot of testing. Now, we're getting some questions in from you. We have a question from Caitlin. Caitlin asks if there's any talk of hazard pay for hospital workers. And the answer is that congressional Democrats are looking for this. They want to include hazard pay in some form of a so-called heroes fund for hospital workers, nurses, EMTs, and other types of first-line responders. They are looking to add that into the next round of bills in response to the coronavirus. They're looking for an additional $13 an hour of hazard pay for up to a total of $25,000 per worker. So that is the answer to Caitlin's question. In case you're wondering what President Trump has been up to today, I mentioned the past 24 hours have been a very sobering 24 hours. It was the deadliest day in the state of New York yet. It was the deadliest day in the state of Illinois yet. President Trump has spent this day attacking some of his opponents on Twitter. He tweeted earlier, "The Wall Street Journal always forgets to mention that the ratings for the White House press briefings are through the roof. Monday Night Football Bachelor finale, according to New York Times. And is only way for me to escape the fake news and get my views across. Wall Street Journal is fake news." So that is the president today quoting about the enormous size of his ratings on a day when two states witnessed their most catastrophic death toll from the coronavirus yet. He also used Twitter today to promote OAN, a fringe media outlet that has of late been an active participant in the White House briefing room. OAN is a fringe outlet that promotes conspiracy theories and frequently indulges in racist rhetoric. President Trump also has been taking to Twitter to make baseless claims about voter fraud. Yesterday, he floated the idea. So in an earlier briefing this week, he said that he was asked whether there should be a plan in place for Americans to vote by mail in case we are still under stay-at-home orders in November, so that Americans don't have to choose between their right to vote and their right to live. And he said that he was adamantly against it and that people who want to vote by mail do it because they want to cheat. He also admitted that he himself votes by mail. Yesterday by tweet, he suggested a different plan. He suggested allowing senior citizens and members of the military to vote by mail, but no one else. This is not quite the same thing as suggesting only allowing registered Republicans to vote and no one else. It's probably as close to that as even he could get without drawing some level of pushback. He did, in the past week, go on Fox and Friends and acknowledge that if there is widespread voting, quote, no Republican would ever be elected again. He complained because the Democrats had sought to put provisions to allow for the potential of vote by mail for the election in November. And he warned that if there were levels of voting that were so high, no Republican would be elected again. That is what Stacey Abrams, a voting rights activist and former candidate for governor of Georgia, called saying the quiet part out loud. All right, so we have some more questions. We answered Caitlin's questions about hazard pay. Patry asks, is it true that COVID-19 deaths have affected minorities disproportionately? And yes, this is absolutely true, and it is something that we are only recently has fully been coming to light. Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana highlighted it at a press conference earlier this week when he acknowledged that while black Louisianans make up only 32% of the population, they account for 70% of the state's deaths. In Milwaukee, black Milwaukeeans are 47% of the population, but make up over 87% of the deaths. In Chicago, black Chicagoans are about 30% of the population. They account for more than half of the coronavirus cases and 72% of the coronavirus deaths. Here in New York, The numbers are not quite as stark, but they are absolutely displaying a discrepancy. Hispanic, Latinx New Yorkers are about 11% of the population, but account for 14% of coronavirus deaths. Black New Yorkers are only about 9% of the population, but account for 18% of coronavirus deaths. White New Yorkers are about 75% of the population, but are only about 62% of the coronavirus deaths. Only Asian New Yorkers are proportionately represented. They are approximately 4% of the total population and 4% of the deaths. Excuse me, that is for the whole state. That is for the entire state of New York. For the city of New York, 34% of the city is Latinx. 29% of the city is Latinx. 32% of the city is white, but only 27% of the deaths are. So those are some striking health disparities that Dr. Fauci spoke to fairly eloquently yesterday, and that just are part of the ongoing systemic racial inequalities that exist in our country. Dr. Fauci noted that in moments of crisis like this pandemic, the existing inequalities and weaknesses of our society are more greatly exposed than ever. All right, we have a question from Robert. Robert is asking, is the forming of the new task force, the economic task force, in coordination with the medical COVID-19 task force, or is this a classic Trump move to pit two factions against each other? And the answer is that this likely, though not yet confirmed, second coronavirus economic task force is going to be devoted solely to fighting the economic impacts of the pandemic. It's likely to be made up of officials from the public and private sector, such as Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Trade Advisor Larry Kudlow. There has been talk of the administration reaching out to Gary Cohn, formerly of the administration, and to several other private sector personalities, including even former professional athletes like Alex Rodriguez. This task force would be separate from the original task force, though overlapping some members. The Washington Post reports that the economic task force would not meet every day, like the medical one, and is expected to have a more informal feel, with many of the meetings held over the phone, and with in-person briefings with the president. The description sounds somewhat like the boardroom meetings from Celebrity Apprentice. We have another question. Does zinc work as a cure? Ivan asks this question. And the answer is no. There is no cure for COVID-19. There is currently no vaccine, and there is no approved therapeutic for addressing COVID-19. Doctors have warned against abusing dietary supplements and overtaking minerals and vitamins like zinc. There is evidence that misuse of zinc nasal spray can lead to permanent loss of smell. It has been suggested that here in New York City that could be an advantage, but it is not recommended. The best way to prevent the illness is to avoid being exposed to the virus. And everyone should wash their hands frequently, avoid close contact with other people, and stay home. And for the protection of others, cover your mouth and nose with a cloth, and cough and sneeze into your elbow. Although most dry cleaners are closed, so you're on your own for getting all those sneezes out of your sleeve. Alex asks, can you explain closing those testing sites in Pennsylvania again? Well, despite direct warnings from the vice president yesterday that the Philadelphia area is, quote, an area of concern, the fact is that Pennsylvania is expected to see its peak resource use by next Monday, and 2 of the drive-through testing sites that have been in operation in the area are going to be closing down due to an ending of federal funding tomorrow. There are multiple local testing sites, I believe it's somewhere between 40 and 80, that have had federal funding, and that funding is ending tomorrow. Please bear this in mind when, again, the vice president says that this administration is leaving no stone unturned. Wendy asks, are doctors and nurses getting the protective gear they need? And the answer is that they're not. We know that there are widespread shortages of, you hear the term PPEs a lot, that stands for personal protective equipment. Here in New York, we have witnessed nurses wearing garbage bags because they don't have protective surgical gowns. A report by the Inspector General of Health and Human Services this past week revealed that hundreds of hospitals surveyed in 46 states had severe shortages of equipment. And this is why the CDC urges, though the CDC recommends that you now wear a cloth mask when you go out, the CDC recommends that you use a homemade cloth or a bandana or a scarf, and that you leave actual medical grade masks to medical professionals. All right, Anna asks, where is the funding for small businesses? And it's a complicated answer. So small business funding was part of the past relief bill that was passed. I'm just pulling up some numbers. Anyway, it was part of the bill that was passed, and the president has been touting the Paycheck Protection Plan, which is part of it, which has been allocating about $250 billion to have forgivable loans for businesses that keep their employees on throughout this. Now, it's important to note that whether your business is a small business is determined by the number of workers per location, not the number of workers overall. So, for instance, Starbucks locations can be designated as small businesses if fewer than 500 employees work at a given location, even though they are part of a large national company. Banks have been inundated with requests for these small business loans, and there were problems with the Small Business Association website on the day of the launch. Republicans are asking for more money for this program. Democrats are on board with more money for this program, but they want it to be paired also with more money for hospitals and local governments. We mentioned a moment ago that hospitals are having shortages of medical equipment. Democrats are saying that they don't want to give more money to businesses, even small businesses, unless there is also more money for hospitals and local governments. So Republicans are asking for an additional $250 billion, and I believe it's a matching amount that Democrats are asking for hospitals and local governments. Cindy asks, when are we going to get the stimulus money? Everyone wants to know about that. Most eligible Americans will get their stimulus by April 17th, according to Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. However, the Washington Post reviewed a timetable from the IRS and says that for Americans who are waiting for actual physical checks, it might take until as late as September for the check to come to you. Whether it comes through direct deposit or by mail is determined by whether you are on file with the IRS for direct deposit. If you usually get money back when you file your taxes and you get it through a direct deposit to your bank account, that is how you are going to get this payment. If you don't, then you're going to be waiting for mail. There may still be time to, if you have not yet filed your taxes for the past year, that is the taxes that would normally be due in April, you actually have until July 15th to file them this year. The deadline's been moved. But if you haven't done it, there's no reason why you have to wait until July 15th. And I believe that if you file them now, before April 15th, that you can still get your bank information in so that you can get a direct deposit. Now, that overlooks the fact that there are some 15 million Americans who don't have bank accounts for any number of reasons. And those Americans, a lot of them are lower income Americans who will be needing this money more, and they are going to have to wait longer for it. It's also important to note that everyone is getting the same amount of money. And that's one of those things that looks very fair on the surface of it, but isn't so fair. I actually need to clarify that. Everyone is not getting the same amount. It is adjusted based on your income level. High income Americans aren't getting a stimulus or relief, whatever you want to call it. They're not getting a relief check at all. It is middle income and low income Americans who are getting it. If your individual income is over $75,000, the amount you're going to get starts getting lower. So that, in that respect, it is favored toward middle and lower income Americans over upper income Americans. But what is not taken into account is where you live. So in New York, for instance, the epicenter of the global coronavirus pandemic, an individual making $75,000 or less will get $1,200, which will not cover a month's rent in a one-bedroom apartment in most parts of New York City. In Kentucky, a person making $75,000 will get that $1,200 one-time payment, and that will cover a month's rent on a three-bedroom house. So if you're one of Mitch McConnell's constituents, that money is going to go a lot farther than if you're one of Chuck Schumer's constituents. I see more people entering the briefing room now. I still do not see the President of the United States. The briefing was pushed back from 5 until 6. It is now 6:20 and the President has not come out. Let me check his Twitter feed and see if I can figure out just what he is up to. That's really the best way to kind of figure out what is going on with the President, is to check Twitter. Okay, well, nothing new since he attacked the Wall Street Journal. That is still the last tweet, so no updates there. Connie asks, why is the federal funding for testing sites being pulled back? That's referring to those FEMA-funded sites, including 2 in the Philadelphia area that we mentioned. The answer is, according to a FEMA spokesperson, because of... that's interesting. The answer, according to a FEMA spokesperson, is because of the FDA approval for individuals to self-administer nasal swab tests at sites, and the demand for personal protective equipment and trained healthcare providers will be reduced. Ah, okay. They're saying that you're going to be able to do more of the test yourself. They're going to have more of a drive-through thing where you stick a swab up your own nose. It's very. I've seen it. I've seen a video of this being done. It honestly feels very Total Recall to me. That's probably too old of a reference for most people here to get. Anyway, they are counting on people to do more testing themselves, and therefore they are imagining that there will be less need for support for personal protective gear, although that clearly that clearly is not resolving the issue for at least those 2 Pennsylvania sites that are closing. I think the argument is that because it's going to be a little bit cheaper to run these, it's going to be easier for states to run it on their own. But in at least those 2 instances, the state isn't going to be running it on their own. They're just going to be closing it. I suspect we're going to see the administration pressed on this today. So I'm hoping that there will be more answers coming out than I'm able to give you right now, or that anyone is able to give you right now. Here is the President of the United States. We're going to try to fact check him live in real time.
I'd like to begin by saying that we just completed a meeting with the Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, and Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, on proposals regarding the airlines and the airline business. And we're working very closely with a lot of different people. We'll be probably putting out a proposal and giving them some of the details, some of the very powerful details over the weekend. It's moving along quickly. The airline business has been hit very hard, as everybody knows, and we are going to be in a position to do a lot to help them so that they keep their employees and they save their businesses. And that'll be taking place, I think you can say, over the weekend. We may even have discussions with some of the airlines or all of the airlines over the weekend. And I think it's going to be a very acceptable package. It's a very big package and a very acceptable package. It'll be good for our country, good for the airlines, good for a lot of people. Likewise, I just spoke with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and the king of Saudi Arabia, King Salman, and we had a big talk as to oil production and OPEC and making it so that our industry does well and the oil industry does better than it's doing right now. It's the numbers are so low that there'll be layoffs all over the world. There'll be certainly layoffs in this country. We don't want that to happen. We built a great energy business in the United States. So we have tens of thousands of jobs. We had a very good talk. We'll see what happens. But as you know, OPEC met today, and I would say they're getting close to a deal. We'll soon find out. So that was a conversation we just had. So we had a busy hour and a half. And let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to the American people. Millions of Americans are making profound and difficult sacrifices in their own lives because they know it will save the lives of countless others, and that's exactly what it's doing. You see what's happening and where we are, where we stand, and hopefully we're going to be opening up. We can call it opening very, 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 very soon, I hope. Together our people are writing one of the most noble chapters in the proud history of our nation. Americans are also encouraged to learn that Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, has been moved out of intensive care. That's a tremendous statement. And we continue to pray for him and his fast recovery. That's a very, very positive development. As the New York metropolitan area continues its battle against the outbreak, the full power of the federal government is there to support them. As you know, the Javits Center.
Okay, it is just not true to say that the full power of the federal government is supporting New York or any state, as has been repeatedly flagged. the federal government has not been able to provide as many ventilators as New York believes that it needs, or masks or other personal protective equipment. Currently, there are about 4,600 New Yorkers on ventilators. Governor Cuomo is concerned that we could soon be out of ventilators and that doctors will have to choose which patients live and which die.
With protective equipment, Project Airbridge continues to expand with more than 24 flights already completed and 49 additional flights now scheduled in the near future. So that's been very successful, and that gear and those outfits are being handed out. As they arrive, they're going directly to point. The American medical system continues to perform beyond our highest expectations, reminding us that the United States is blessed with the most advanced healthcare and the most skilled healthcare workers anywhere on the planet. Other countries are looking to what we're doing, and our testing operation has now become far and away the most sophisticated and the best anywhere. And we want to thank all of the heroes on the front lines as they fight.
Okay, it is simply not true to say that our testing is the best anywhere. In terms of testing people per capita, we rank about 41st in the world, and a Washington Post report from yesterday highlighted that there is still not a national testing strategy, and governors from multiple states are complaining that they do not have the equipment that they need to perform the tests. Even if they have the tests themselves, they don't have the basic elements. They don't have enough of the swabs needed to perform the tests.
Physically apart, no American is alone, and we're all in this together. But the mental health doctors and experts, it's a very great call. It was a very interesting call. They're working very hard. We're also seeing encouraging signs in our race to develop breakthrough treatments and therapies. Pfizer revealed today that it has found a promising new treatment that might prevent the virus from replicating, and that it hopes to begin testing in clinical trials very soon. It's going to be very, very soon. They have great feelings for this particular therapy, and they think that a lot of good things are happening through the FDA's Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program. 19 therapies and treatments are now being tested, and 26 more are in the active planning or clinical trials. So we have 19 therapies being tested currently, and 26 more are in the active planning for clinical trials. That's a big statement. That's a lot. Trials for...
Okay, what he's just said about some of this testing is false. That testing is scheduled to begin this fall.
Getting good early results, by the way. The companies that manufacture hydroxychloroquine are massively ramping up production. As you know, many people are recommending strongly Z-Pak be added, the Z-Pak.
Okay, so the president just keeps doing this thing with hydroxychloroquine and also Z-Pak. Hydroxychloroquine has not been shown to be an effective treatment for the coronavirus. There just simply is not the evidence. There are some very dangerous side effects. President Trump has recklessly urged Americans to start taking it on their own, even suggesting that he might. It has potentially lethal side effects, and also there have been reports that he has financial ties to at least two of the companies that make it.
Milestone for our country. It's a milestone anywhere. Nobody's done anywhere close. Our tests are highly sophisticated and highly accurate. At the same time, we're making important progress on the economic front of this war. In a few moments, Secretary of Labor Eugene Scalia will explain new steps.
The president says that we are making important progress economically. This comes on the day when we've had another earth-shattering number of unemployment claims. 6.6 million new unemployment claims this past week. That means that over 16 million Americans have filed for unemployment in the last 3 weeks. That is more than in the first 2 years of the Great Recession.
employees, and $500 billion will be available for states, counties with over 2 million residents and cities with a population of over 1 million. My administration is also working with Congress to replenish the very successful, incredibly successful, the way it's going, Paycheck Protection Program, which is allowing hundreds of thousands of small businesses to keep their workers on the payroll, meaning it'll keep those businesses open. We need both Democrats and Republicans to come together to get this the legislation completed, and it looks like it's on its way, but we need both, and it should be for people that are working, for the workers. And if you look and you see, we have a lot of people that are affected by that, and it's a very positive development, so we have to get a bipartisan approval of that, and hopefully that'll happen today. The Department of Education is also announcing the availability of more than $6 billion in emergency grant funding to assist college students impacted by the cancellation of classes and the suspension of housing. A lot of people had a lot of things suspended. Housing is one of them. Previously, we waived student loan payments for 6 months. So student loan payments have been waived for 6 months. So we'll discuss it after that. May go further. Although this medical war has separated our citizens for a period of time, it's also united our entire nation. I think I can say, like almost never before, Americans are moving forward with...
Now, the president is talking about unity. It is striking. Whenever he is reading from his scripted notes, he talks about unity, and when he is speaking off the cuff, he starts attacking people. Reminder, his last tweet was attacking the Wall Street Journal as fake news and complaining that he wasn't getting enough attention for the great television ratings of these briefings.
Airlines. Yeah, please.
Conversation with President Putin and the King.
Yeah, I had a very good conversation.
Did you organize that call, and do they understand the problems they're causing with
Yeah,
the oil output?
yeah. No, there's so much production, nobody even knows what to do with it. That's how it's working. And Saudi Arabia and, as you know, Russia, it's well known that we're producing a lot, and they were perhaps fighting with each other over the production and the amount of oil being produced. And frankly, there's not enough room to even store it. Our storage is now full, going to be very soon. Our strategic national storage is, I said, this is a great time to fill it up, load it up with oil that frankly is at pricing that nobody's ever seen before. I don't think we've seen this probably since the 1950s. That was with big dollars. So we'll see what happens. The conversation was very good. They're getting close to a deal. That's OPEC and many other countries outside of OPEC, and we'll see what happens.
By the way, if you're ever looking for a very destructive drinking game, when the president says, we'll see what happens, if you take a shot, that'll probably mess up your night quite a great deal.
Not so good, but I think one way or the other. Go ahead, Jim.
Mr. President, how could the administration discuss the possibility of reopening the country when the administration does not have an adequate nationwide testing system for this virus? Don't you need a nationwide testing system for the virus before you reopen the country?
We have a great testing system. We have the best, right now, the best testing system in the world. But there are certain sections, there are certain sections in the country that are in phenomenal shape already. Other sections are coming online. Other sections are going down.
Okay, I just want to tell you from personal experience. I'm here in New York City, the epicenter of the global pandemic, and we can't get tests here. My wife is recovering from symptoms of what very much seems to be that it could have been the coronavirus, but because she is not deathly ill, we can't get a test to find out. It is simply not true to suggest that Americans have access to widespread testing.
About 325 million people, and that's not going to happen, as you can imagine, and it would never happen with anyone else either. Other countries do it, but they do it in a limited form. We'll probably be the leader of the pack. Please.
What do you say to the 16 million Americans, more than 16 million Americans who have lost their jobs in the last 3 weeks and fear that the economy won't just bounce back, like you said?
Well, I think the economy is going to do very well. Now, that's just my feeling. It's a strong feeling. I've had good, proper feelings about a lot of things over the years, and I think we're going to do well. We're doing very...
It is important to note that President Trump's gut feelings about things over the years actually have not served him well. Most of the businesses that he has run have failed, and he has very famously made predictions that, for the most part, have not come to pass.
20,000 to 220,000, or if we did nothing, up to 2.2 million people. We're looking at a much lower level than the level of, I hope, than the level of 100,000. So we're going to see. We're going to have to, you can never do anything about the people that lost their loved ones and lost their friends, and I mean the great friendships, and I'm not sure a lot of people will ever be the same, but I think our country, from an economic standpoint, will end up being stronger than ever. We have tremendous stimulus. We have tremendous stimulus plans. We have things in the works that are going to really, I think, fire the country. I think that what's going to happen is we're going to have a big bounce rather than a small bounce, but we will be back. And I think, honestly, I think our country is going to be back from an economic standpoint. Again, you can never replace the people that were lost, and to their families, certainly you can never do a thing like that. But we will have succeeded in many ways.
Okay, so there's several things going on here. The president is trying to frame anything short of 100,000 deaths as a success. The fact of the matter is, to date, more Americans have been killed by the coronavirus, there have been 5 times the number of deaths as from the 9/11 attacks. So it is hard at this point to call anything a success, especially as we know that the president and his administration were briefed about this potentially as early as last November and did not take any form of decisive action until March, and still do not have a nationwide strategy for testing nor a nationwide stay-in-place order.
And what happened is the virus knocked out 40% of the market. Immediately, you know that, you know the number, 40%. Now, there was a lot of oil, but it was very controllable. All of a sudden, they lost 40%. You look at the roads, you look at the car, you look at what's going on. There's nobody driving. There's no reason for it right now. That'll start coming back. But we are storing millions of barrels of oil that nobody thought would even be possible. Frankly, ships turned out to be a good business for some people because they're filling up tankers, sending them out to sea and not saying where to go. They're just sitting out there loaded up with oil. So we want to save our energy in this country. We want to make sure that our energy companies, businesses, and employees, workers, remain strong. So that's how I'm involved, and I think that's going to happen. So right now, if you look, you're probably talking 23, 25. If they announce a deal, we can get it up. We need a minimum number so the companies don't go out of business, so they're not going to lay off all of these energy workers who are important to our country. And, you know, we're now energy independent. We could do something where we only used our oil. But I think the long-term benefit is to be able to just go with the market, and it's going to work out. It's all going to work out. If you looked at 3 weeks ago, as you know, as we talked about it, 3 weeks ago and 2 weeks ago, this was catastrophic. I think it's really hitting bottom, and I think that, I mean, we've had a bottom, but now at $23 and $25 and probably heading up. At the same time, we save our energy, and we also produce great, cheap energy, and we save our jobs. Yeah.
I want to ask you about the Paycheck Protection Program, because every day we're hearing from small business owners who are telling us that their banks don't know how to access this money. They're trying to apply. They can't figure it out. So where does the fault lie? Does it lie with the banks?
I don't think there's a fault. They're doing record numbers of dollars. They're dealing with many community banks. They're dealing with Bank of America, Citibank, a lot of Wells Fargo, as you know, is very much involved. And they're dealing with the bankers. Can't go that quickly, but I'm hearing it's a very, very successful rollout.
Well, the president is overstating the level of the success of the rollout. Website failures have put a roadblock in a lot of these loans, as has an unwillingness of banks to lend to new borrowers, that is, borrowers who don't already have existing business with the bank. And other banks have just been so overwhelmed that they have not even been able to process the applications for loan.
Own the.
Well, we have a
of the
deal.
new rules?
Yeah, the deal is with Canada, the deal is with Mexico, we have a deal. And obviously the deal is different from the standpoint that production will be lower, but we have a deal. It's a signed deal. It's a deal that's one of the worst deals that we've ever had was NAFTA, one of the worst trade deals ever made by any country anywhere. We'll be terminating that. And the new deal is a great deal for our country. So
Actually, the president is overstating the differences between the New Deal and NAFTA. There are definite improvements that people from either side of the aisle can agree upon are better about this New Deal, but in many key respects, it is more accurate to describe it as a new NAFTA than something totally different.
eating less from the standpoint that there's no restaurants are open, no businesses are open, no hotels are open. They'll start to come back. But we're going to be helping out our farmers. Yeah, please.
The new
Go ahead.
regulations.
Thank you, sir. Philip Wegman, Real Clear Politics. Earlier you mentioned Project Skybridge, and we're hearing that through that project, a lot of the PPE that was sent out to other countries is coming back to this country. Do you know when we will be able to bring a majority of that back? And then are you frustrated that USAID allowed a lot of that aid to go out the door in the first place? Should they have brought it back?
I'm not, because we're in very good shape. You'll be speaking with Mike Pence. You look at the hospitals, you look at what's going on. Yesterday I spoke with...
The president is again saying that hospitals have the supplies and PPE that they need. This is simply not true. We are seeing hospitals across the country, nurses and doctors complaining that they do not have the protective gear they need to protect themselves and their patients.
Happen for hospitals, ideally, to keep and have. But no, I think we're in very, very good shape. We have calls with governors all the time, and the governor's in very good shape now. We have helped. We have sent billions and billions and billions of dollars between ventilators, equipment, protective equipment, masks. We have 500 million masks coming. 500 million from one group. 500. It'll be 300 million and 200 million over a short period of time. Now, I think we're in very good shape. Please.
President, speaking of testing, some experts, including Scott Gottlieb, have talked about 750,000 tests per week being needed before the economy is opened. Can you address that? Do you agree with those numbers? If not, how many tests per week do you think we should have before the economy is open?
I don't like using the word needed because I don't think it's needed, but I think we're going to try and hit a number like that. That's a very high number, but we're...
Okay, the president is suggesting that testing is not needed. Testing, public health officials will all say unanimously, is the most crucial instrument needed to figure out how and where this disease is spreading.
Hospitals and states need this money. Would you support?
I do, and I do support something, but I support it for the next phase. It's much simpler in the next phase, whether that phase is infrastructure or whatever. So I'm going to leave.
So the president is saying, as I'd mentioned earlier, Democrats want to tie this next round of funding for business to also providing funding for hospitals and local governments. And the president is saying that has to wait.
And I believe what's happening with airlines. I look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Well, the president has left this briefing a lot earlier than he leaves most briefings. Well, I mean, I guess not earlier by the clock because he came out so late, but spent a lot less time talking to us. Now we are hearing from Vice President Mike Pence, the chair of the task force. I've mentioned several times that his public health policies as governor of Indiana led to the state's worst HIV outbreak in history. I don't think I've mentioned before that also he was an advocate trying to make the case that smoking does not, in fact, cause cancer. He is not a medical health professional, but he is the leader of our nation's global health pandemic task force.
Our hearts go out to the families that have lost loved ones. And I want to assure you that all of us working at every level understand these are not numbers, these are lives. And our heartfelt condolences during this heartbreaking week go out to every American family that's lost a loved one to the coronavirus. It has been...
To put that in context, the Vice President has said that these are lives and not numbers. I want to remind people that on a day when New York and Illinois reported their worst death toll ever in this crisis, the President was tweeting about different numbers. He was tweeting about his rating numbers in TV ratings for these briefings.
The Denver Metro, we continue to see evidence of stabilization. And it appears, as Dr. Berg suggests, that we are close to the peak in each of those areas so impacted. We also express gratitude and appreciation for the people of California and Washington State, who continue to be low and steady in the number of cases that are emerging there. We're watching the Chicago metro area. We're watching the Boston metro area.
The Vice President is highlighting the success in curtailing this disease in Washington State. Washington State was the first hit and has been extremely successful because of aggressive policies by Governor Jay Inslee, whom President Trump referred to just recently as a snake.
Encourage you onward in that. Today, the White House Coronavirus Task Force met, but most of the team also met with Republicans and Democrats in two separate conference calls of the United States Senate. Secretary Mnuchin, our health experts, Admiral Polovchek, Dr. Hahn joined us as we discussed a broad range of issues. The Treasury Secretary touched on the Paycheck Protection Program, now in day 5. Reporting $125 billion has been approved so far. 30,000 new individual users and 3,900 lenders are participating. We also discussed that the Treasury Department will issue a new frequently asked question document tonight, an FAQ as they're known, to clarify how seasonal businesses can participate in the Paycheck Protection Program as well. With regard to direct payments to Americans, the Treasury Secretary assured senators, and we assure every American, that we remain on the timetable where the first payments in direct deposits will go out by the end of next week. For the average family of 4, that'll be $3,400 in direct financial support, and will no doubt be welcome news.
But as we have mentioned before, if you are not getting direct deposit, you may have to wait as long as until September to get a physical check. Also, while we may be nearing what could be a peak in some places like New York, officials like Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio say now is not the time to let up on social distancing practices and other guidelines that prevent the spreading of the coronavirus. Doing so could undo the progress that has been made.
What they need, when they need it, and to see the progress that we've made. The President just reflected on in New York.
And the Vice President is saying that they're going to make sure that everyone has what they need when they need it. As we've highlighted, there are 2 testing locations outside of Philadelphia that are going to be closing down, just as Philadelphia is expected to become one of the nation's new hotspots. As we have said, multiple states, virtually every state that is facing a large number of cases, is complaining that they do not have enough ventilators, enough masks, or other protective gear.
We've stood up 29,000 National Guard, 11,000 of which are fully funded by the federal government under Title 32. Also, speaking of our military, at the present moment, we received a report today from the Department of Defense that 4,100 active duty military medical personnel have been deployed in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And they are personnel that are working on the ground at the Javits Center, working, of course, at the USNS Comfort ship. But because at the present moment, the utilization of both of those temporary facilities has been fairly modest, the DOD actually worked with the city of New York to establish what amounts to a uniform temp service. They call it the bullpen. And today they literally deployed from the ship and from the Javits Center 75 medical personnel to relieve dedicated healthcare workers within the hospital system in the city of New York, and we'll continue to do that. We're going to make sure those federal temporary hospital and Javits Center is fully staffed. We'll make sure the USNS Comfort is staffed, but the physicians, those military personnel, are going to also be deployed across the city to bring much needed relief to our healthcare workers in our system. From the VA standpoint, we've opened up VA facilities in New York City, East Orange, New Jersey, Detroit, Michigan, and we are opening up the VA facility to coronavirus patients in Shreveport, Louisiana. Finally, I mentioned that today we exceeded more than 2 million tests that have been performed across the country. And also, literally, working with the U.S. Public Health Service, states around the country have stood up hundreds of drive-through testing sites. And just this week, FEMA and the U.S. Public Health Service announced that we will give an option to states to transition from a federal testing site, dozens of which have been assembled around the country, to a state-managed site. I want to emphasize that this is an option. We believe it gives states greater flexibility to style sites or manage sites in areas that they think are most important. But we're also processing requests for continued federal participation in states from New Jersey to Louisiana to Illinois, Colorado, and Texas. And we want to assure people in communities all across the country that we'll continue to partner with states to the extent that they prefer us to be a part of it.
All right. Well, this contradicts information that we have received earlier. I'm going to check on whether this is a change of policy or whether this is a incorrect explanation.
Leave no stone unturned around America and around the world. We're literally in the process of acquiring tens of millions of supplies that are being brought into a distribution system organized out of FEMA and focused on the areas most in need. We're also bringing real innovation, and at the White House Coronavirus Task Force today, we tasked the FDA and CMS to review the feasibility of allowing hospital workers to use cloth gowns for performing procedures. It was observed that 20 years ago, most physicians and most surgeons wore cloth gowns every day and laundered them, but it's transitioned to disposable gowns, and we're working very rapidly in the next 24 hours, and we'll have guidance for hospitals and healthcare workers about the ability to in effect recycle gowns and make sure that we have the supplies that we need. As the President mentioned today, the President and the First Lady and I and my wife Karen we're honored to be a part of a conference call with mental health professionals from all around the country. And we know while there are families that are struggling with the coronavirus and struggling with heartbreaking loss to the coronavirus, we understand this is a very challenging time for every American, but most especially Americans who struggle with mental disorders or struggle with addiction. And the President brought some incredibly dedicated people together to make sure that they know we're with them. Early on, the President expanded access to telemedicine, and we've also issued guidance for using technology to remain connected to social support groups. And we just urge everyone who may be feeling an emotional burden or a vulnerability during this time to reach out to the many resources that are there, and to know that you're not alone, that we're with you, and we'll get through this, and we'll get through this together. So despite heartbreaking losses that continue this week in communities from New York to New Jersey to Louisiana, there are signs of progress, and hope abounds. The reality is that we see new projections from the experts, and if the projections are right, it's because it's working, America. It's because the American people are putting into practice the social distancing, caring for their neighbors and their loved ones and their family members, and putting their health first. And we just want to urge every American to continue to put those principles and guidelines into practice every day.
Now, again, I really want to emphasize that the principles and practices that the task force asks people to engage in, they're not requiring. And there are 8 states, all with Republican governors, that still are not closing down businesses, not urging people to stay at home. And that is leading to a surge in cases in those states, which then pose a threat to their neighboring states.
Per day are being tested, so we're way over the 750,000 per week currently. We have some statistics. Now remember, we required this, thanks to Congress, to be reported. We have about 75% of that test data in now. About 1.5 million of those tests have been reported in. I just wanted to give you some ideas, because sometimes we think that we're only testing in the hospitals, so this should give you an idea of the quantity and the types of tests that have occurred. So we've tested over 200,000 young people up to age 25. They have about 11% positivity rate. Over 500,000 people between 25 and 45. They have a 17% positive rate. Now remember, in order to get tested, you have to have symptoms. So this gives you an idea of the number of people who have symptoms that are not infected with coronavirus. Another nearly 500,000 people between 45 and 65, their positivity rate is 20.
All right, the video's frozen, and I'm going to fix that.
Individuals over 85, and they have a 24% positivity rate. And so this gives you an idea of, we're testing throughout all age categories. I see a lot of men in the audience today. I just want to remind them about the importance of health care. Of the male-female ratio, 56% of the people who are tested are female, 16% positive. 44% male, 23% positive. So again, it gives you an idea about how men often don't present in the healthcare delivery system until they have greater symptomatology. This is to all of our men out there, no matter what age group. If you have symptoms, you should be tested and make sure that you are tested. We appreciate you engaging in that, and also really recognizing the issues about comorbidities and making sure that we're addressing those. I had a series of great calls with about 17 states that are in our more rural areas, specifically around our indigenous people and tribal nations. It was a very reassuring call, and we are testing across the country. We do have about 63% of states that have less than 10% positive despite significant testing. And within the indigenous peoples and tribal nations, they're seeing the same thing that we're seeing across the nation. Increased issues among those with comorbidities and those of elderly, but also issues in nursing homes. And so they are testing, many of these states are still capable of doing full contact tracing. And so they've been doing contact tracing from nursing home outbreaks and other outbreaks. It really gives us a clear impression of, no matter what we do in the future, we need to really ensure that nursing homes have sentinel surveillance. And what do I mean by that? That we're actively testing in nursing homes, both the residents and the workers at all times. That is where, and that's how we saw this at the beginning. That's what we saw in Washington State. And that's what we're seeing in many of the states that have very low case attack rates. The other thing that I want to leave you with, we certainly know how desperate and difficult the situation has been in New York over the last few weeks. And we've been telling and talking about how this would be the week that would be most difficult because of the large proportion of cases that are coming from the New York metro area. What's been encouraging to us, those early states outside of Washington and California, which still have extraordinarily low attack rates because of their level of mitigation, all of the new areas that are having new increasing cases, we talked about them yesterday, Washington and Baltimore and the Philadelphia metro area. That includes Camden, Wilmington, and the counties around Philadelphia. we're seeing that the case numbers, what we'll get to as far as attack rates, we talked about 1 in 7 in 1,000 in New York that are being measured. These are coming in, even with their progress up their curve, in the 1 to 2 per 1,000 range, showing that when you start mitigation early, it has a very different impact. All of this data is coming together, the testing rates, the seropositivity, the age groups, who really needs hospitalization, ICU, the innovative pieces coming from, we heard a great report from Louisiana this morning on the phone call where they talked about a minimum now of 40% of people coming off of ventilators alive and leaving the hospital. This is very encouraging to us. Really shows amazing progress clinically at each of these hospitals, and the real lessons that we're learning and sharing across hospitals. But really shows us that the original outbreaks were very large, but the newer ones that we talk about in Washington and Philadelphia and Baltimore, it looks like their attack rates and the attack rates in Denver and some of these other states that we have been talking about are much lower than New York and New Jersey. And this gives us hope about really understanding how to integrate this information together, not dealing with a model, but the real life cases that are occurring, and understanding how to move forward together to really have a different future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. So just reflecting about what we've been doing over the last few days, remember last weekend when we made the forecast that this would really be a bad week? As I mentioned yesterday and the day before, it is, in the sense of deaths, a bad week. In fact, every day there seems to be a record of number of deaths compared to the day before. In fact, New York today had, again, another record of, I think the city itself was about 820 plus deaths. But what we were predicting with the increase and the real adherence to the physical separation, the guidelines that the Vice President talks about, the physical separation, at the same time as we're seeing the increase in deaths, we're seeing rather dramatic decrease in the need for hospitalizations. Like I think yesterday was something like 200 new hospitalizations, and it's been as high as 1,400 at any given time. So that is going in the right direction. I say that, and I always remind myself when I say that, that means that what we are doing is working, and therefore we need to continue to do it. I know I sound like a broken record. That's good. I want to sound like a broken record. Let's just keep doing it. I get questions a lot, Dr. Birx and I, about these numbers, the projections that you went from 100,000, 200,000, now down to 60,000. That's a sign that when, as I keep saying, when you take the data you have and you reinsert it into the model modifies. Data is real, model is hypothesis, okay? So that's what you have to do, and that's what I think we're seeing. The other thing that's some just broad general good news from the standpoint of a scientific standpoint, that there are a lot of candidate potential therapeutics that are going into clinical trials now that we're sponsoring at the NIH. The kinds of clinical trials that will give us the answer. Are they safe? Are they effective? And just what is the capability of using them under what circumstances? As prophylaxis, as treatment, in early disease, in late disease. So as the time goes by and we have the public health measures to try and contain this, we're doing an awful lot from a scientific standpoint so that when we do get to next year, next fall, next winter, hopefully we'll have something that we can offer in addition to the very important public health measures. So I'll be happy to answer questions later.
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Vice President, thank you, and thanks to the task force, and of course thanks to the President for his leadership. The important public health measures that have been discussed so much in these briefings in this room have had a large impact in American workplaces. We saw that again today as the Labor Department released figures showing that 6.6 million new unemployment claims were filed last week. We're all mindful, the President mentioned this, that the American people are making difficult sacrifices. That has included being furloughed, laid off, or having a small business struggle. That said, American workers can be encouraged by how swiftly and comprehensively the President and Congress have responded. 3 weeks ago, the U.S. had never had a law requiring paid sick leave at U.S. companies. But 3 weeks ago, the President signed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which did provide paid sick leave, as well as expanded family and medical leave for employees at small businesses. With those,
I want to point out that Democrats have been calling for paid sick leave for a long time now and have been blocked at every step of the way by Republicans. And the paid leave that has gone into place now is only for during this time of this pandemic. And it would be nice if we could develop policies that keep Americans safe and healthy without having to go through a pandemic.
2 weeks ago. That law, as you know, includes a $600 a week plus up to unemployment benefits that are provided by the states. We have millions of unemployed Americans who are making a sacrifice for our national well-being. These bonus payments, and they're unprecedented, the government has never provided a plus-up unemployment payment like this. These payments are intended to make those workers whole as near we can. This temporary benefit is available not just to employees, but also to the self-employed and gig economy workers. Before the President signed the CARES Act, gig workers, independent contractors were not available for unemployment compensation. Today they are. At the Department, our team has worked day and night to enable states to make this benefit available. I'm pleased that a number of states are now making those $600 additional weekly payments. More states will follow in the coming days. How long it takes will vary by states. Some states' systems will take longer. But we at the Department will continue to support them. We have already dispersed $500 million to states to help them with their systems and making these payments. We have another $500 million that we're ready to release. And for workers who don't get this benefit when it's first due them, states will be able to catch them up later when their computer systems are able to make these payments. Let me add that we're also mindful at the Labor Department that many Americans remain in the workplace, including on the front lines in our hospitals, as well as our emergency responders. My department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has been providing guidance to employers and employees on coronavirus since the early days of this health emergency. We are fielding and responding to calls from workers worried about their health, and sometimes from workers who believe they've been illegally disciplined by their employer for expressing health concerns. We will not tolerate retaliation. OSHA will continue to work with workers and employers to keep workplaces safe, using all the tools available to us, including enforcement.
By the way, I just want to call to your attention. So this is Eugene Scalia, Trump's labor secretary. He actually is the son of the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, and he has a long history as a corporate lawyer in actually fighting against workers' rights for corporations. And if there's time, I'll get into some of the details of those things that he's done in the past later.
Here's why that program is so important from my perspective. We're seeing unemployment filings right now of the like that we've never seen before. But these numbers aren't the result of an underlying weakness to our economy. Our economy has been vibrant, incredibly strong just weeks ago. If, as we've heard again today, if we are disciplined now and adhere carefully to the guidance being provided by health authorities, we'll get that economy back. The President spoke at the State of the Union of the blue-collar boom we are experiencing. We want to lay the groundwork now for a blue-collar bounce back.
I want to point out the President frequently falsely claims that prior to all this, the economy was the greatest that it has ever been, which is not true. But specifically in terms of blue-collar workers, whom the Secretary is talking about, for most working Americans, real wages, when adjusted for inflation, have actually been falling in recent years, not rising.
Great job. Great. We'll take a few questions. Yes, please.
Mr. Vice President, a question for you and then a question for Dr. Birx or Dr. Fauci. Just to clarify, on the federal funding for testing sites in the states, are you saying that federal funding will remain for those sites and will it remain at its current levels?
It's not merely federal funding, but in many cases we provided personnel from the U.S. Public Health Service and also flowed supplies, personal protective equipment that was required for some of the early forms of testing, but it's less required today with new formats for testing. But it is an option, and as I've made clear to several governors, we'll continue to partner with our states. But I have to tell you that.
All right, so our team has been further looking into this, and when the Vice President says that it is an option, he's really putting quite a spin on it. As multiple outlets have reported, this funding is going to stop for these local testing sites tomorrow, and to get continued funding, states must go through an application process or a reimbursement process that has not yet been defined. And so as a result of this change, testing sites some of them will be taken over by the state and continue, but others are going to close, including those two that we mentioned in the Philadelphia area, right when Philadelphia seems to be needing them the most.
That they're seeing evidence of reinfection in some people who had been cured of coronavirus. And what does that mean for our understanding of this?
Have you seen that?
I'm not aware of what you're speaking about now, but clearly there have been anecdotal mentioning of what appeared to be reinfection. You have to really be very careful when you say reinfection, because and we were dealing with this with even Ebola back during the Ebola time, that someone might still, when someone does a test on them, do a PCR on a body fluid of some sort and be able to detect what are likely nucleotides that are not replication competent. So if you're telling me, which I don't think they're saying, that someone has coronavirus disease, they get sick, it's documented, they get better, and then a month or so later, they get sick with documented coronavirus disease. I don't think that's what they're saying, but I don't want to jump the gun on it until I see the data.
They use the word reactivate. Is that different?
Yeah. Well, yeah, what reactivating what means is that it depends what you mean by reactivating. If someone clearly is ill and they have virus isolated from them, that you may have a prolonged course. I'd like to see how long they reactivate. I mean, if they were sick and had documented virus, and then 3 months later they had documented virus, is that reactivation or is that infection with another virus? I'd like to see the data before I really comment on that. Yeah.
Dr. Fauci, I wanted to ask about the medical criteria. You had a discussion with Dr. Birx and the other public health experts on Tuesday, I understand. Can you discuss what is the medical criteria that you guys are discussing in order to reopen the government? What is the medical criteria?
Well, it's less medical criteria than it is public health criteria. And that is, and I think it's really important because often people say reopen the government like it's a light switch that goes on and off for the entire country. We have a very large country with really different patterns of disease and outbreaks in different parts of the country. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be, what is the kinetics of an outbreak? Is it on the way down? Is it essentially out? Is it still smoldering and possibly going up? I think you're going to have to take it individually. And
are there some benchmarks that you're looking at, though? I mean, are there some numbers that you're looking at, some data that you would like to see? What would you like to see before that happens?
Yeah, well, I will allow Dr. Birx to come up with just my own opinion. I don't think they're going to be benchmarks that are going to be consistent from one to the other. For example, I would not want to pull back at all in New York until I was clear that that curve really was doing what we've seen in other countries, a very steep decline down, and we had the capability, if there was a resurgence, of having everything in place to be able to do the containment as opposed to struggling with mitigation with what we've been doing. That's different than a relatively smaller city, town, or whatever in the Midwest or mountain regions
which is generally very well controlled. What I would want to see, do we have the capability of doing the isolation, contact tracing, and suppression of it? So it really varies differently. So I don't think there's one medical criteria. But Deb, if you want to speak to it.
Thank you. And I gave. In talking to the 17 states that have indigenous populations and tribal nations, and discussing with them what they were doing generally and what they were doing specifically through the Indian Health Service, they discussed the ability to find new cases and doing full contact tracing. And so they have strike teams. They are very well organized. You don't hear about them every day, and that's why I wanted to call them out. They are really doing amazing work at their public health institutions with their governors and their mayors, and they are in full contact tracing. Yes, they're doing social distancing, but they're also doing full contact tracing and understanding all aspects of their epidemic. So we're looking at those pieces, as well as when I was talking about blunting, really when you're starting to go up that curve, having that unbelievable blunting where you only get evident attack rates. And I want to be very clear about that. When we see cases, these are symptomatics that have been diagnosed. There's clearly, we believe, people we don't see. And that's why the antibody test is going to be helpful to us to really define that. So those are the pieces that we're bringing together to really analyze that. I did want to say the president talks about the 150 plus countries that are experience what we're experiencing. I just wanted to do a call out. We have Americans.
It is 184 countries that have the disease.
Now, this scarf came from Africa. It's one of my public health colleagues there. I just want to recognize the public health colleagues around the world who are doing all of this work together to change the course in their epidemics in every single country around the globe.
Let me go to another question if I can, but in response to that, just so you know, what the President's tasked us to do is there's a number of working groups and that are looking at not only how do we reopen the country, but how do we stay open, and and I think most of America knows that no one wants to reopen America more than President Donald Trump, but the President's told us we need to do it responsibly, and we're going to follow the data. We're literally following the data on a county-by-county basis. This morning, we were literally presented with information of
All right, the signal seems to have stopped for a moment.
the President's decision and timing. But make no mistake about it, that the best thing we can do to reopen America is put the coronavirus behind us, to reach the end of that curve with as little loss of life or hardship as possible, to have in place that we soon believe we will, the kind of therapeutics, I call them medicines that make you feel better, by this summer, and to have more widespread testing that we're scaling up each and every day, and also to have the kind of guidance that the CDC is even now developing for businesses large and small, for families and for schools, for that day that we do reopen America. Question? Go ahead.
One more follow-up to the doctor. So it touches on this question of when to lean back on mitigation. There is a study out of Los Alamos this week that I hope you've seen. It's on the CDC website that looks at this question of R-naught, which is a technical term that you understand that has to do with the reproductive rate of the virus. The study shows that the R-naught for coronavirus isn't between 2 and 3, as had been thought before, but it's actually closer to 6, which means that one person on average is infecting 6 others. So with this information, how does that impact the model? How can you begin to think about when to reopen society if it's more contagious than we thought before?
Well, I can tell you as the layperson on the stage.
Go for it.
We have known from the beginning that this is at least 3 times more contagious than the flu. And I believe that fact alone has informed.
The President of the United States has repeatedly actually tried to compare this to the flu. In fact, on February 26th, he said specifically that we should treat it as the flu.
when we've been talking about the asymptomatic group, and that's why I gave you that testing data where 11% of young people under 25 were positive, many of them very low-grade symptoms. What we will be triangulating for you is the testing data with hospital admissions, and then you'll be able to start seeing spectrum of disease. Because what you're not seeing in spectrum of disease is people who never even think that this is something significant, that what they have. We're seeing the significant cases. In testing, you can see that we're getting a lot of people in with symptoms who aren't positive. And so really finding out what is the R naught. Is it 6? Is it 5? And the only way to do that at this point right now is to get the antibody tests out there and go into these places that had significant disease. When we talk about attack rates of 7 per 1,000 like New York and 5 per 1,000 in New Jersey, and test the healthcare workers, the first responders, all of the nursing homes for antibody, and really get to your question. Because right now it's still theoretic. We understand they're modeling this, and we will get the data to actually look at that. You will see what others have been presenting. So you presented the 6. What others are presenting, importantly, is they're modeling what's happening with mitigation, and they're publishing that the R naught with mitigation is approaching like 1.3 and 1.5. So that, think of what that is. If it was 6, and then with mitigation, we have it into the 1s. That really shows the power of the American people. No one has varied R naughts like that without a vaccine. But this is what's happening with really the power of the American people, Tony.
Yeah. Ditto to everything that Dr. Birx said, but I couldn't help but thinking when you talk about, you know what the worst enemy of an R naught is? Physical separation.
How about one more? One more. Go right ahead.
Testing capacity in the country right now to reopen in the foreseeable future? I mean, because the president talked about 2 million tests. Are we going to have the testing capacity needed to make Americans feel comfortable going back into their workplaces? I mean, it seems to me that is a pretty critical question at this point. People are not going to want to go back to work if they think their coworkers might be carrying the virus. If we're not testing enough, how do we know it's safe to go back?
Well, I think the American people see the incredible progress that's been made after President Trump brought in the largest commercial labs in the world to scale testing, the likes of which we've seen. We are, as Dr. Birx said, well over 100,000 Americans being tested every single day. We have an antibody test that is coming up.
On the subject of testing, earlier I said that America was 41st in the world in testing per capita. We are actually have dropped down to 43rd. Our testing response has been universally panned by public health officials. Dr. Ashish Jha of the Harvard Global Health Institute said this is an unmitigated disaster that this administration has brought upon the population. Greg Gonzalez of the Yale Global Health Justice Partnership called it the greatest public health failure in 100 years. It just is not true to say that we are in a great place for testing.
For most major communities. Another piece of that is that we have therapeutics for Americans to take medicines if they contract the disease. Another piece of that is guidance from the CDC to public institutions, to businesses large and small about how to conduct themselves in a safe and a responsible way. And testing is also a piece of that. And as Admiral Jha has reflected, we are spending a great deal of time expanding testing today. Every single day there's more and more tests across the country. But we're also working to scale testing that as we move into this summer and move into the fall, we'll have the testing we need to do what these doctors call not diagnostic testing, which is to take a test of a person that has symptoms, but surveillance testing so we can identify people that may have had it and may be immune versus people people that we just need to know whether or not they were ever exposed or and were not exposed. How about one more quick question here, if I can? I think he had one right here, or I'll go to you in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. In the next few weeks, the Supreme Court is set to rule on DACA and on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, and about 30,000 of those people who are under that program are frontline healthcare workers. Is the administration in any way ready to protect them if the ruling comes in your favor and takes the protection out and they can no longer work in the health field as they're needed right now?
Well, I think the President's been very clear on his desire to reach a solution on that issue with the Congress. But let me...
Well, the President has not been clear on trying to reach a solution. It is because of the President that America's dreamers are now in jeopardy. And as that reporter correctly pointed out, many of them are the first responders, the healthcare providers who are putting their lives on the line. And this week we're going to bring you the story of a paramedic dreamer who is risking his life and now has his status risked by this effort to strip him of that protection.
Drivers to grocers. We received a good word that over the last several days we've actually seen a significant drop with one major company in absenteeism. We issued new guidance from the CDC about how people who may have been within close proximity to someone who had the coronavirus could return to work before the 14 days if they didn't have a fever, if they tested themselves twice a day and returned with a mask. But the dedication of people to continue to work is truly inspiring. And I know as we go forward, we'll work through a broad range of national issues, but we're going to be incredibly proud for a long time by the way people all across this country responded to this moment. So thank you all very much. We'll see you tomorrow.
And that is the end of today's Coronavirus Task Force briefing. One of the later things that the Vice President said, he said that we are at the end of the coronavirus for most major communities. That is simply not the case. It appears, as has been the warning from New York's governor, that while New York was the first wave, that there will be subsequent waves in other states and in other cities, and that we are on the lookout for those, and that any efforts to end practices of social distancing early will jeopardize the lives of Americans and add to both the death toll and the economic toll. So that's tonight's briefing. I had the support tonight from our remote newsroom of Maddie Green, Zara Heder, Matt McDonough, Ian McKenna, and Shelby Vaculin. And my name is Alan Piper. I am the senior politics producer at NowThis. And I'll be back tomorrow, tonight. If you are celebrating Passover, I know that it's a different type of Passover, and I hope that the spirit of holding on to life and hope in the face of darkness and despair stays with you. Likewise, if you are looking ahead towards celebrating Easter this weekend. And for everyone, please stay safe. Please stay clean. Wash your hands. Avoid contact with other people. But look out for the people that you love, and please let them know how much you love them. Thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow.